So, welcome to Midweek Experiments in Faithfulness. This is a weekly facilitated spiritual practice with a Quaker flavor and an experimental ethos. My name is Jen Higgins Newman, and I'm the program manager here at Beacon Hill Friends House, which is a Quaker Center for Learning and Action and a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values. And tonight we have Karen Tibbals with How Can We See That of God in Those We Dislike? So, our country is divided. We don't talk to each other. How can we learn to love one another and bring peace? Karen Tibbals has mined the latest in psychology research to find a commonality that we all have and can use to help us see the other in a new way. Endorsed by Richard Rohr, Karen's book is a helpful guide to understanding people in a new way so you can talk to them more productively. So before we get into the program, I'll let folks know, well, I know all of you people, so I'm going to turn on the automated closed captioning in a moment, and then you'll see that. You can hide or not show the subtitles. You know that we're recording, that we don't include all of you in the midweek, that we send it to you when we're done. So now I'm excited to introduce you to Karen. Karen Tibbals is a passionate researcher and author who came to writing books after studying why people act the way they do for decades as part of her successful corporate career in marketing as a marketing researcher. She took a detour from her career for a degree in religion and Quaker studies from Earlham School of Religion. And she was so excited about what she learned that it totally changed how she thought about life. To capture these thoughts, she's written 2 books about how these theories apply to life and to marketing and marketing research. So you can learn more about Karen's work at persuadedon'tpreach.com. So again, welcome. We're happy that you've joined us, and Karen, it's all yours.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to do something that I don't usually do. So this is a little bit of an experiment, and I hope everybody bears with me. So I'm going to break what normally would be one presentation into 2 different ones, and I'll stop it and we'll practice trying to do what I'm talking about after the first one. And if we have time, which I think we probably will, we'll go on to the second part. Well, we all know this country and our world is divided, and we don't know how this is going to end. And in fact, at times it seems hopeless. There doesn't seem to be a solution. The only thing that gives me hope is my belief that God can solve it. My vision of God is a much more powerful entity than any of us. And if God wants to, I think God could resolve this conflict. I've had glimmers of hope from a spiritual practice that I've started doing for myself. It's changed me and how I feel about others. Tonight I'm going to share it with you. I hope you find it useful. I hope you find hope and that you will pass it on to others. But we can't keep going on the way we have. These divisions aren't just happening in our politics, they're happening in our relationships. It happened to me a few years ago. My last visit with my Aunt Dot ended with me saying, "Aunt Dot, that's rude. Jeannie is sitting right over there." You see, my aunt had gone on a rant about how immigrants shouldn't be allowed into this country, and her immigrant caregiver was sitting in the same room. That's the last time I ever saw her before she died. Aunt Dot was my childless aunt, the one who'd been there for me my entire life. A holiday wasn't an occasion without my Aunt Dot and her gifts and her camera. There's a whole stack of pictures I got from my cousin after she died. Aunt Dot was an integral part of my life. That's the last time I saw her before she died. I didn't call her, and she didn't call me. You see, I didn't know what to say to her. I was still mad, but more than that, I felt stuck. What could I say? Similar scenes are playing out across our country and our world. Sons are disowning mothers, parents of children cut grandparents out of the kids' lives, couples split up, or they just yell. And name calling. Holidays have become a minefield, a nightmare. The fabric of our lives is unraveling. How can we solve this? Is there a clue for what God wants us to do? Interestingly enough, I found part of my answer in a book that I read when I went to seminary, but it wasn't a religious book. It was a psychology book. It's called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And the key lesson, one of the key lessons that I took away from this book, is that we need to separate the person from their values and from the positions they take on issues. Now, this is a crucial first step to the spiritual practice that I'm describing, recognizing and seeing the differences there. And what it has done for me, it's allowed me to put a space in between what I hear, between the thought I might object to, and that could make me upset, and my reaction. And that space is part of the spiritual practice. It helps me to see the other person differently and helps me to understand what's important to them on a deeper level. Tonight, I'm going to share with you more details of what I've been learning about these values from Haidt's work and from the other research that I put in my book. And there's another crucial part of this and these ideas is that those values, those are invisible. We never talk about them, but we fight wars over them. That's pretty ridiculous. People are willing to die for their values, but we ignore them. And that's why recognizing them for what they are is so important and enables us to change ourselves and change the conversation. So what are those values? Haidt says that there are 5 key values that everyone in the world shares. Now, there's teams of researchers who've been working on this. They've done studies from all over the world with hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm going to take you through a summary of that research. I've created montages of pictures that represent each of the values. I'm going to show you each montage. And I want you to please call out the words that come to mind when you see the montage. So here's the first set of pictures. What words come to mind when you see these pictures?
Commune or community.
Community. So the first one is belonging and community. So here's the second set of pictures. What words come to mind when you see these pictures? I'm going to use the word authority to represent this. Here's the next set of pictures. What words come to mind when you see these pictures? Religion, faith, calm. I'm going to use the words sacredness, purity. And then there's these 2 pictures. What words come to mind when you see these?
Balance.
Balance.
Justice.
Justice. I'm going to use the word fairness. And then this is the final set of pictures. What words come to mind? I'm going to use the words care for others. So there was 5 of these that I showed you pictures of them. Belonging, community, respect for authority, sacredness, purity, fairness, and care for others. Everyone, all humans, have these same 5 values. But, and here's the big but, we get into conflicts when we either interpret the values differently and or we place different importance on them. The research has shown is that people who self-identify as liberals tend to place much, and I'm like, I can't give you any more of those muches, but it's a lot of much more importance on the bottom 2, fairness and care for others. They're like off the charts how much importance that liberal people who call themselves liberal put on that. On the other hand, people who call themselves conservative are approximately even across all 5 of them. Now, obviously there's a lot of variation, but I'm talking about the overall statistics, and individual people are going to be different. I know my score is very different than this, and if you took the test, which is a great idea to do, you do find out that you may not fit into the pattern, but many people do. Many people do. The way that plays out is that conservatives end up being higher in belonging, people who call themselves conservative. And specifically, they have a specific interpretation of belonging in that it's associated with a place. That's why conservatives tend to be more nationalistic, more patriotic, and liberals, on the other hand, tend to consider themselves more global citizens. Conservatives are higher in respect for authority, and they're higher in sacredness and purity, and plus they have different interpretations. Here I've put the pictures that are more associated with a particular religion on the side with the red or the right conservative view, and the pictures that are more pure, meaning pure water and the white rose, more associated with the liberal. Those are in general, and obviously there's lots of variations, but that's just a generalization to help you get a handle on what the differences are. Now, the dark underside of the idea of sacredness is the feeling of disgust. Now, disgust is tied to the feeling of nausea, and there's actually a facial movement that you can get with your mouth and your nose. When you're feeling disgusted, your nose flares and your upper lip curls, and it's called the disgust gape. And it was first described by Charles Darwin, of all people. And people who are more easily nauseated by various things are more easily disgusted by things. And they also tend to be more racist, people who are easily nauseated. And disgust can cover a broad range of items, including race, including body shape, including whether or not you see blood and gore. But there's a lot of things that people find disgusting. And they've done one research study to give people an anti-nauseant, which is just a ginger pill. And they've shown that the feeling of disgust, and specifically anti-racial attitudes towards negative attitudes towards another person's race, have gone down when they give them the ginger pills. So this stuff goes so deep, it affects your actual feeling of whether or not you're nauseous or not. In terms of fairness, liberals are placing much more importance. As I said, they're way off the charts, and they tend towards an interpretation of equality. And I represented that with the balance beam with the two stones of about the same size, but they're different colors, and the balance beam is balanced. On the other side, I'm showing this balance beam that looks kind of odd. Like, why should that be balanced? It doesn't look like it really belongs that way. And I'm using that to represent something that's called the merit-based flavor of equality, which is if people try harder, if they work harder, if they're smarter, or whatever the merit base is, then they quote unquote deserve more. And you think of that for like selective college admissions would be a good example of a merit-based form of fairness. And then finally, everyone obviously believes in caring, but because conservatives have all those other things going on, it's mediated by the other foundations, and it's much more typically viewed as a very liberal value, even though obviously everybody does. And as I said, these go so deep they affect nausea, but they also affect brain functioning. We use different parts of our brain for the different moral foundations. And we use one part that I've highlighted here, the amygdala. The insula is involved with the feeling of disgust. It affects hormones like oxytocin and testosterone. It affects saliva production. It affects sweat production. So it's no wonder that when we're talking to someone and we're having a conflict and their brains are operating differently, it's no wonder they can't hear us. Their brains are working differently. Their hormones are working differently. And that just means we've got 5 of these things, and they can reinforce each other and they can conflict. And that's one of the reasons why people are so complicated and unpredictable. Let's go back to my talk with my Aunt Dot. Obviously, that wasn't a very spiritual experience. I just reacted. If I could have put a space in that conversation, I probably wouldn't have called her rude and walked out. So that part, just that very part of it, would have been useful and helpful. But if I could also have looked at the values that she was referencing, that would have helped also. Because she was talking about the issue of immigration, she's probably referencing the value of belonging in community. Me, I was concerned about Jeannie, who's in the same room, her caregiver. So I was focused on the care for others. That's what caused the conflict. We were talking about the same issue, but we were referencing different values. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't share the value of belonging. As Haidt has said, we all have all of them to different degrees. I just don't place as much importance on it as she does. But we never talked about those invisible values. We just use them. So now that you know the basics, I'm going to give you a little bit of a practice. I've been collecting images that illustrate one or more of the moral foundations. And as I show them to you, I want you to call out or put in the chat what moral foundations you see in each one of these images. So these are the ones. Okay, so here's a headline from the New York Times. A lesson of Sandy Hook, err on the side of the victims. A tidal wave of aid bore witness to the power of human kindness. The money that engulfed Newtown, Connecticut also sowed division. So what moral foundation is this headline from the New York Times using in when it wrote the headline? Anything in the chat? No?
Yeah, I think we're thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, care for others.
Yes, absolutely. And coming from the New York Times, virtually almost every single article is going to have care for others in it because it's a liberal newspaper. Number 2 is from the website of the ACLU, LGBT rights. The ACLU works to ensure that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people can live openly without discrimination and enjoy equal rights, personal autonomy, and freedom of expression and association. So what moral foundation is the ACLU referencing it when they make this statement?
In the chat's fairness.
Yes, absolutely. Number 2, it's from Australia. If you really want to touch someone, send them a letter. What moral foundation is the Australia Post Office referencing when they make this ad?
Belonging.
Belonging, yes. I've also heard care for others. It can be both. So you can have more than one. Number 2, this is a little poster for the Army. I want you for the US Army. What moral foundation is this poster referencing?
Belonging and community.
Yes, absolutely. And there's also a bit of authority in here because he's an authority and he's ordering people. Number 5 is a screenshot from a Walmart commercial. Walmart is making a $250 billion commitment to American manufacturing. What moral foundation is Walmart referencing when they make this statement?
In the chat, care for others.
Okay.
I think it's belonging and community.
Yes, that's what I would say because of the American part of it. It could be some care for others in there too, but I think it's stronger in belonging community. Now this one I have to first say, this is an ad for UN Women, and I have to say this is not a good ad, but I want to talk about it anyway. It's a picture of a beautiful young woman with a search box over her mouth, and the words in the search box say women need to, and then underneath it are some quote unquote things that other people put in there that are come up as suggestions. Things like women need to be put in their place, women need to know their place, women need to be controlled, women need to be disciplined. The message that they want to get across is underneath that. It's not as easily seen, which is why I say this isn't a very good ad. That says women need to be seen as equal. What moral foundations are working in this ad for the UN Women?
Fairness.
There's definitely fairness, the equal. Equal is definitely a tip-off word for fairness. There's another one though that's really important, which is the authority. Women need to be disciplined, women need to be put in their place. Our authority statement. So there's dueling moral foundations in this ad. Number 5 is a magazine. The title, Clean Eating. What moral foundation is this magazine referencing in the title?
In the chat, purity.
Yes, absolutely. Cleanliness is next to godliness, definitely. And the last one is a pro-life ad, All Lives Matter, End Abortion Now. What moral foundation are they using when they make this ad?
In the chat, sacredness.
Yes, yes. Most pro-life is sacredness. This one is also fairness because it's all lives. So now you've got an idea of how those moral foundations are playing out in the issues that we have, in the images that we see, in the ads that we see, and the kind of arguments people make. And my thesis is that there is that of God, something that we Quakers talk about, that we believe that there's that of God in every person. And I think that there's that of God in the values that we all share, because we all have the same values. That's part of what makes us human. And that seeing them in the other person, that's a spiritual practice. So what I want to do for an exercise is I want you to think about a situation that you have in your life, a person that's a problem, or a conversation you had that was difficult, or even if you want to talk to a person about, and you haven't talked to them yet, but you are hesitant about it. Think about that situation and see if you can identify for yourself what issue you want to talk about and what value is driving what you think about. And then the other person talking about the same issue, what value would be driving them? And I'll tell you that my work is starting to be picked up by Friends Committee on National Legislation, and they just did a similar exercise. And so you could even think about it in terms of lobbying. If you had somebody you wanted to talk to, a congressman, that's what they're doing it for, or a representative. Any sort of situation that you think might cause a conflict and this might be helpful. So that's what we're gonna do as an exercise. Was the concept useful in thinking about the conflict? What I'm going to do is I'm going to share how you can talk to somebody if you don't share the same value. So what would it be like if we could talk, instead of talking from our own values, if we could talk from another's? The Aesop fable of the sun and the wind illustrates this idea. The sun and the wind decided to have a contest to see which one was more powerful. Both of them were trying to get the traveler to take off their cloak. The wind went first, and it blew as hard as it could. That's what it's like when we argue vehemently from our own values. Of course, what does the traveler do? It holds onto their cloak as tightly as it can. Of course, the wind didn't get the traveler to do what they wanted to. The sun goes next and shines brightly, and the traveler then takes off their cloak and sits down and basks in the sun. So which one was more powerful? Obviously, it's the sun. And that's what it's like when we can talk to somebody from their own values and not from our own. In fact, there's research that backs this up. The more powerfully we argue with someone, the more we yell and scream, the more strongly they hold on to their own beliefs. And that's why this idea is so powerful. When we can talk to somebody from their own values, then we can get them to relax and to bask in the thought that someone agrees with them. And then they can listen. And we can persuade, maybe. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but it does work much better than yelling. A pair of academic researchers has proven this in their work. Matt Feinberg and Rob Willer have done several studies that have all demonstrated that using another person's values is a compelling way to convince somebody with a different viewpoint. They've done studies on both conservative causes like support for the Army and English as a required language, and for liberal causes like universal health care, environmental issues, and same-sex marriage. And what they found is that if you can use a value that the other side feels is important, you can shift some of their attitudes. Now, not everybody, but some of their attitudes about it. And it's so powerful that in the environmental study, even though they didn't mention climate change, the attitudes towards climate change also shifted. But this isn't just an academic experimental technique. As I've been studying this, I've been collecting examples in the real world, and let me take you through one of them. This is Pew Research data on environmental attitudes by political party from the periods of 1994 to 2016. And you can see that the attitudes towards environmental protection among Democrats has been going up very slightly over that period of time, over 20 years. But what's happened among Republicans is it's gone down, and the parties have gotten further apart. Now, what's going on? Well, the first clue is to look when it happened. It happened in the mid-aughts, approximately. What's going on then? That's when the language that was being used about environmental concerns shifted from the purity language that's stronger among conservatives to more liberal words such as care for others. So by using the words that did not reflect the values, you see a decrease in attitudes. And this is exactly what Willer and Feinberg showed in their study. They showed the obvious. They showed the reverse, that if you use the purity language, if you use, say, you need to protect the earth because we need to protect the sacred earth, you can get conservatives on board. But we've been doing the opposite. So what could I have done differently? Here's what I wish I could have said. Aunt Dot, you're talking about immigrants. Is that because you love this country so much? And then I would shut up and listen. I could ask her questions about what she thinks makes this country so great. But one of the most important things I would have done is I would have named the invisible value and recognized the value of belonging community that she valued so much. And then I could have found something to agree with her about. And then I would have had an opening to make my point. I would have reframed it, which is what Willer and Feinberg do, to take another value that she probably finds important. And I'm going to choose for this example, and this is one of my favorite ways to do this, is to use the merit-based flavor of fairness. I could have said to her, Jeannie, your caregiver works really hard to take care of you. You're well fed. She keeps you clean, and she dresses you every day. She's always there. What do you think about immigrants like Jeannie who work hard? Should they be allowed to come to this country? Now, conservatives tend to believe that the merit-based flavor of fairness is a virtue. Although I don't know what would happen because of that, I think she might have started thinking differently. She might not have, but even if she didn't, I would have respected her value and shown that I cared about it. And we would have been able to continue the conversation. And then I would have had the last 18 months of her life to continue the relationship. Being able to connect with others on their terms, using their language, that's another spiritual practice. So let's go back to the situation that you had. What do you see differently in this perspective? And what could you have done differently to have built the bridge? It's these sort of changes, these spiritual awakenings that we can use to help heal our divisions.